Something terrifying is happening in the deepest laboratories around the world, and scientists are struggling to understand what they've unleashed. Quantum oscillations that defy every law of physics are being detected right now, suggesting our universe is no longer alone. Subscribe now and tell us in the comments, what would you do if you discovered another version of yourself from a parallel dimension? The evidence is mounting that parallel universes aren't just science fiction anymore, they're becoming our reality. Recent discoveries have left the brightest minds in physics questioning everything they thought they knew about existence itself. What started as routine experiments has evolved into the most shocking revelation in human history. The barriers between dimensions are breaking down, and we might be witnessing the beginning of a cosmic collision unlike anything ever imagined. The laboratories of CERN fell silent on a cold February morning in 2025, when Dr. Elena Rodriguez first noticed the readings that would change everything. For months, her team had been conducting routine particle acceleration experiments using the Large Hadron Collider, the most powerful scientific instrument humanity had ever constructed. But on this particular day, the quantum oscillations emerging from their data defied every fundamental principle of physics they had spent decades studying. The oscillations weren't random. They displayed patterns so complex and organized that they seemed almost intentionally designed, as if something from beyond our reality was trying to communicate through the very fabric of space and time. Dr. Rodriguez, a veteran physicist who had spent 25 years studying quantum mechanics, found herself staring at readings that suggested particles were behaving as if they existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, something that should have been theoretically impossible according to everything science understood about our universe. The discovery sent shockwaves through the international physics community because these weren't isolated incidents. Similar anomalous readings were being detected at research facilities across 3 continents. Swiss and American physicists using a large particle accelerator have detected anomalous quantum oscillations that cannot be explained by the standard laws of physics, and this may be the first evidence of the existence of parallel worlds. The implications were staggering. If these readings were accurate, it meant that our universe was somehow interacting with other dimensional realities in ways that challenged the very foundation of modern physics. Teams of scientists working around the clock began to notice that these quantum oscillations followed specific patterns that seemed to intensify during certain astronomical events, particularly when specific cosmic bodies aligned in ways that hadn't occurred for thousands of years. The data suggested that whatever was causing these anomalies was not random, but followed a precise cosmic schedule that seemed to be building towards something unprecedented. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, Google's quantum research division was experiencing their own terrifying revelation. The tech giant's revolutionary quantum computer chip, known as Willow, had achieved something that should have been impossible. It was solving computational problems so complex that they would take classical computers longer than the age of the universe to complete. But what truly sent chills through the research team wasn't just the computational power. It was the realization that the chip seemed to be accessing processing power from sources that didn't exist in our known reality. If the claim holds water, it could revolutionize not just quantum computing, but our understanding of reality itself. Accessing or interacting with parallel universes might open doors to unimaginable possibilities, solving previously unsolvable problems, accessing infinite resources, or even unlocking secrets of time travel. The quantum states within the chip were exhibiting behaviors that suggested they were borrowing computational resources from parallel versions of themselves across multiple dimensions, essentially confirming that alternate realities weren't just theoretical constructs but active participants in our reality's quantum processes. Dr. Marcus Chen, leading Google's quantum AI research, described the experience as watching our computer perform calculations using mathematics that don't exist in our universe. The implications were terrifying because it meant that the boundaries between dimensional realities were far more permeable than anyone had previously imagined. The astronomical time frame, which exceeds the universe's age, led Google Quantum AI's founder, Hartmut Neven, to suggest that the performance of Willow validates the existence of parallel universes. Each quantum calculation seemed to create microscopic tears in the fabric of reality, allowing information to flow between dimensions in ways that violated fundamental principles of causality and information theory. The research team began documenting instances where the quantum computer would produce results that seemed to incorporate knowledge and data that hadn't been inputted into any earthly system, as if it was accessing information databases from alternate versions of Earth where different historical events had unfolded and different scientific discoveries had been made. But perhaps the most disturbing evidence was emerging from the frozen wasteland of Antarctica, where NASA's cosmic ray detection equipment had been recording increasingly bizarre phenomena. The Antarctic Impulse Transient Antenna, or ANITA experiment, which was designed to detect high-energy neutrinos from space, began registering particles that, well, appeared to be traveling backward through time, a physical impossibility that suggested these particles were originating from a universe where the arrow of time flowed in the opposite direction. Cosmic ray experiments have detected particles possibly originating from outside our known universe, adding even more intrigue to the multiverse theory. Scientists monitoring these experiments reported that the backward-moving particles weren't just random occurrences, but seemed to be increasing in both frequency and intensity, almost as if two universes with opposite temporal flows were beginning to intersect at specific points in space-time. The data suggested that somewhere in the cosmos there existed a mirror universe, where time flowed backward from our perspective, and this alternate reality was somehow bleeding through into our dimensional space. The Antarctic research stations became ground zero for the most disturbing discoveries, as teams began documenting environmental anomalies that simply couldn't be explained by conventional meteorology or physics. Temperature readings would fluctuate wildly without any identifiable cause, compasses would spin erratically as if magnetic north was constantly shifting, and most unnervingly, researchers reported experiencing moments where their memories seemed to contain information about events that hadn't yet occurred in their timeline. Dr. Sarah Kim, a particle physicist stationed at the Amundsen-Scott South Pole Station, documented instances where equipment would register readings from experiments that hadn't been conducted yet, suggesting that information from future timelines was somehow leaking into the present. The implications were catastrophic, because it meant that the fundamental structure of causality, the principle that effects must follow causes, was beginning to break down as parallel universes with different temporal orientations began to merge with our reality. The scientific community's initial excitement about these discoveries quickly transformed into genuine terror as researchers began to understand the potential consequences of parallel universe intersection. Unlike science fiction portrayals where alternate dimensions existed harmlessly in separate spaces, the mounting evidence suggested that these parallel realities were actively merging with our universe in ways that could fundamentally alter the nature of existence itself. Physicists around the world reported similar phenomena, laboratory equipment producing results that violated conservation of energy, quantum experiments yielding data that seemed to incorporate variables from alternate timelines, and most disturbingly, instances where researchers would find their own experimental notes written in handwriting they didn't recognize, containing calculations and discoveries they had never made. The realization that alternate versions of themselves from parallel dimensions might be somehow influencing their research created an unprecedented crisis in the scientific method, as the very foundation of empirical observation became contaminated by variables from alternate realities. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, whose initial discovery at CERN had opened this Pandora's box of dimensional horror, found herself at the center of an international scientific emergency as governments and research institutions scrambled to understand the implications of her findings. The quantum oscillations she had first detected were now occurring with such frequency and intensity that they were causing observable changes in the behavior of matter at the subatomic level. Elements were exhibiting properties that didn't match their positions on the periodic table. Fundamental constants of physics were showing microscopic variations that accumulated into significant changes over time, and most terrifyingly, the rate of these changes was accelerating exponentially. Her team's calculations suggested that if the current trend continued, the merger of parallel universes could reach a tipping point within months, where the basic laws of physics would become so unstable that matter itself might not be able to maintain coherent structure. The global response was swift but chaotic, as world leaders struggled to comprehend threats that existed beyond the scope of traditional military or economic concerns. Emergency meetings were called between the world's leading physicists, but their discussions were hampered by the fact that the very instruments they used to study these phenomena were being influenced by the dimensional convergence they were trying to measure. Research data would change between observations, experimental results would vary depending on which scientist was conducting the measurement, and, most disturbing of all, some researchers began reporting conversations with alternate versions of their colleagues who claimed to be from parallel dimensions where different versions of these same experiments were being conducted. The line between scientific observation and interdimensional contact was becoming increasingly blurred, leaving humanity's brightest minds struggling to maintain their grip on objective reality while studying phenomena that challenged the very concept of a single, stable universe. As news of these discoveries began to leak beyond the scientific community, despite efforts to maintain secrecy, public reaction ranged from fascination to existential terror. Social media platforms were flooded with reports from individuals claiming to have encountered alternate versions of themselves, experienced memories from parallel timelines, or witnessed environmental anomalies that seemed to violate basic physics. While many of these reports were likely hoaxes or just misinterpretations of natural phenomena, the sheer volume of similar accounts from unconnected sources across multiple continents suggested that the dimensional merger wasn't confined to high-energy physics laboratories, but was beginning to affect ordinary people in their daily lives. Psychologists and psychiatrists reported unprecedented increases in patients experiencing identity confusion, temporal disorientation, and vivid memories of events that had never occurred in their documented personal histories. The economic implications of the dimensional convergence began to manifest in ways that traditional financial models couldn't predict or explain. Stock markets experienced wild fluctuations that seemed to follow patterns from alternate timelines where different historical events had shaped global economics. Companies found their intellectual property rights challenged by identical innovations that seemed to emerge simultaneously from research teams who had no contact with each other, as if multiple versions of the same discoveries were bleeding through from parallel dimensions where different versions of the same companies existed. Currency exchange rates began exhibiting quantum-like behavior, where the same monetary transaction would yield different results depending on when and how it was observed, suggesting that even human economic systems were becoming entangled with their alternate dimensional counterparts. Central banks around the world struggled to maintain monetary stability while dealing with financial phenomena that operated according to rules that didn't exist in any economic textbook. Religious and philosophical communities found themselves grappling with implications that challenged fundamental concepts of identity, soul, and spiritual existence. If infinite parallel versions of every person existed across multiple dimensions, what did that mean for concepts of individual identity and personal responsibility? Theologians debated whether souls existed separately across all dimensions, or if consciousness was somehow shared between parallel selves. Philosophers struggled with questions of free will, in a reality where every possible choice was simultaneously being made by alternate versions of the same person in different dimensions. The discovery that multiple versions of Earth's history were converging raised uncomfortable questions about the nature of suffering, morality, and meaning, in a universe where every possible outcome existed simultaneously across infinite parallel realities. Dr. Rodriguez found herself leading an international task force dedicated to understanding and potentially controlling the dimensional merger, but their efforts were complicated by the fact that the phenomenon seemed to be accelerating beyond their ability to study it safely. Each experiment designed to understand the convergence seemed to catalyze additional merging, as if the act of scientific observation itself was causing the barriers between dimensions to weaken further. The team discovered that consciousness itself might play a role in the dimensional intersection. The more people became aware of the parallel universe merger, the more rapidly it seemed to progress, suggesting a terrifying feedback loop, where human knowledge of the phenomenon was actually accelerating humanity's movement toward an unprecedented cosmic transformation that no one fully understood or knew how to stop. The most recent data emerging from research facilities around the world painted an increasingly urgent picture of a universe in transition. Quantum oscillations were no longer confined to particle accelerators, but were being detected in natural phenomena ranging from the behavior of electrons in everyday materials to the orbital patterns of celestial bodies throughout the solar system. The fundamental forces that held atoms together were showing signs of instability that suggested the basic building blocks of matter were being influenced by their counterparts from parallel dimensions where different versions of physical laws might apply. Time itself seemed to be becoming unstable, with researchers documenting instances where cause and effect relationships were becoming scrambled, where events would occur before their apparent triggers, and where the linear progression of moments that define human experience was beginning to fragment into multiple simultaneous timelines. The terrifying reality that scientists were beginning to accept was that the merger of parallel universes wasn't something that might happen in the distant future. It was already happening now, accelerating with each passing day and potentially irreversible. Humanity found itself in the unprecedented position of witnessing the fundamental nature of reality itself undergoing a transformation that could render everything they thought they knew about existence completely obsolete. The question was no longer whether parallel universes existed, but whether human civilization could survive the cosmic collision that was reshaping the very fabric of space, time, and consciousness itself. As Dr. Rodriguez stared at the latest readings from CERN, showing quantum oscillations that had increased by another order of magnitude overnight, she realized that humanity was racing against time to understand a phenomenon that might ultimately transcend the very concept of time itself. The scientific community's desperate search for solutions was hampered by the fact that traditional approaches to crisis management were completely inadequate when dealing with threats that operated across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Every attempt to contain or reverse the dimensional merger seemed to create unpredictable consequences that rippled across parallel realities, potentially affecting infinite versions of Earth and countless alternate histories where humanity had evolved along different paths. The weight of responsibility for decisions that could impact not just their own universe, but every possible version of existence created a paralysis of analysis that left even the world's brightest minds struggling to determine appropriate courses of action. As the boundaries between realities continued to dissolve, humanity found itself standing at the threshold of the greatest transformation in the history of existence, facing a future where the very concepts of reality, identity, and consciousness might be forever changed by forces beyond their comprehension or